My name is Emily Carter, I'm 42 years old, and I work as a structural engineer. The day my brother laughed about shared blood, over burgers and beer at our family barbecue, everything I thought I knew about my family collapsed. By midnight, I had lost my identity, my trust in the people who raised me, and the only version of my childhood that had ever made sense. And if you've ever sat in a lawn chair smiling, while your entire life quietly cracked underneath you, then maybe you already know how this story feels. The barbecue was on July 3rd, 2024 at my parents' house in Columbus, Ohio. Same house they'd owned since 1989. White siding, faded green shutters, a backyard that always smelled faintly like charcoal and cut grass in the summer. I arrived around 4:20 p.m. with a bowl of pasta salad balanced on one arm and a six-pack of ginger ale, because I don't drink much anymore. My brother Ryan was already there flipping burgers beside my dad. My sister Melissa sat under the maple tree scrolling through her phone while her husband sprayed bug repellent on their kids. Normal. That's the strange thing about life-changing moments. They usually begin as painfully ordinary. I remember hearing Lynyrd Skynyrd playing through my dad's old outdoor speakers. I remember the heat sticking to my skin beneath my cotton blouse. I remember my mother kissing my cheek without fully looking at me, already distracted. Emily put the salad inside, and don't forget we're eating around 6. Not hello, not how are you. Just instructions. That had always been our rhythm. As an engineer, I spent most of my career studying load distribution, how pressure settles unevenly across structures, how some beams carry more weight than others until they eventually fracture. Families work the same way. Some children become decorative trim, others become support columns. I was the support column. Reliable, useful, never cherished in the loud obvious ways Ryan and Melissa were. I didn't fully understand it growing up. I just knew I was somehow adjacent to everyone else, included but never entirely inside the circle. When we were kids, Ryan got birthday parties with rented bounce houses. Melissa got dance recitals filmed from 3 different angles. I got practical gifts. A backpack, a calculator, a winter coat. Things you give someone you're responsible for, not someone you ache for. I used to tell myself I was imagining it. Kids are sensitive, families are complicated, parents get tired. You build little bridges of logic so your heart doesn't drown. But there were moments I couldn't explain away. Like Thanksgiving 1996, I was 12. My Aunt Denise brought photo albums, and everyone gathered around the dining table laughing at baby pictures. There's Ryan with mashed peas all over his face. There's Melissa in the hospital nursery. Then silence. I remember my aunt flipping pages. Where's Emily's hospital picture? My mother answered too quickly. Oh, hers are packed away somewhere. Then she stood up immediately and started collecting plates. I remember noticing it. Even then. Another time when I was 16, my dad taught Ryan how to drive in the church parking lot every Saturday morning. Ryan stalled the car constantly, but Dad never lost patience. When it was finally my turn months later, he sighed after 10 minutes. You're too nervous, relax. I wanted to ask why gentleness came so easily for everyone else. Instead, I apologized. That became my role in the family, the apologizer, the adjuster, the one who absorbed tension so nobody else had to. I became very good at it. Engineers solve instability, we compensate for weak points, we reinforce failing systems. I spent my whole life reinforcing a family structure already cracked at the foundation. Still, I loved them. That's the humiliating part. I genuinely loved them. Especially my father. My dad, Richard Carter, was a quiet man with rough hands and tired blue eyes. He worked 31 years as a machinist at Worthington Industries. He smelled like metal shavings and Old Spice. He never said, "I love you" often, but when I was little, he tapped twice on my bedroom door every night before bed. 2 soft knocks. Always. That was his version of love. When I was 9, I fell off my bike and split my chin open on the sidewalk. Blood everywhere. I remember panicking more about him being disappointed than about the injury itself. Instead, he carried me inside and sat me on the bathroom counter. "You're okay, Emmy," he said quietly while cleaning the wound. "Concrete always wins doesn't mean you stop riding." I thought about those words for years. Concrete always wins. Keep going anyway. Another memory, my senior year of college at Purdue in 2004, I called him crying after failing a dynamics exam. "I don't think I'm smart enough for this," I told him. He paused a long time. Then he said, "Bridges aren't built because the wind stops, they're built to survive it." That sentence carried me through almost every difficult thing in my adult life. My father was never openly affectionate, but with me there was this quiet understanding, or at least I believed there was. That's why what happened later destroyed me so completely. Around 6:15 that evening, we all gathered around the patio table balancing paper plates loaded with burgers and corn. Ryan had already been drinking for hours. My brother was the kind of man who grew louder instead of kinder when alcohol hit him, 45 years old, and still performing for attention like a frat boy who never emotionally graduated. He was telling some story about his co-worker discovering through one of those ancestry websites that he had 3 half-siblings in Arizona. Everyone laughed. Then Ryan pointed his beer bottle around the table dramatically. "Well, at least we know this bunch shares blood." Something inside me tightened. Not because of the joke itself. Because in my purse, tucked inside a manila envelope beneath my wallet, was a DNA test result I hadn't shown anyone yet. 3 weeks earlier, I'd taken one of those ancestry tests after my doctor asked about family medical history during a routine appointment. "You don't have any history of breast cancer, heart disease, autoimmune disorders." I realized how little I actually knew. So I ordered the kit. At first, I thought the results were wrong. Then I ordered a second test through another company. Those results arrived on June 29th. 0 biological connection to Richard Carter. 0 biological connection to Melissa. Ryan listed as possible half-sibling at 24.8%. I had been carrying those papers around for 4 days like they were explosives. I laughed at Ryan's joke because everyone else did. But my fingers had gone cold. Then Ryan looked at me. "Right, M, same defective Carter DNA." My mother dropped her fork. Tiny sound. Metal against paper plate. But I heard it. Engineers notice stress fractures others miss. I looked at her. She wouldn't meet my eyes. And suddenly, every strange moment from my childhood rearranged itself into a terrifying new shape. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I said carefully, "Actually, maybe not." Silence. The kind that arrives all at once. Even the music suddenly seemed too loud. Ryan laughed first. "What does that mean?" I stared at my mother. "Mom." She looked pale, not guilty yet, just frightened. My father froze beside the grill. I can still remember the exact smell in the air at that moment. Smoke, barbecue sauce, citronella candles. My hands were shaking so badly, I nearly dropped the envelope, pulling it from my purse. I took a DNA test. Melissa frowned. "So?" I looked at my dad. And God, I wish I could forget his face. Because before I even said the words, before anyone explained anything, I saw it happen. Recognition. Not surprise. Recognition. Like a man watching a storm he always knew would arrive. "You're not my biological father." My voice cracked halfway through. Nobody spoke. Ryan stared at me like I'd grown another head. Melissa whispered, "What the hell?" My mother started crying immediately. Not soft crying. Violent crying, hands over mouth, shoulders shaking. And that was the moment I knew it was true. In structural engineering, there's something called progressive collapse. One failure triggers another until the entire structure comes down in sequence. That was my brain. every memory failing one after another. My father stood very still. Then he quietly said, "Margaret." My mother kept crying. "Tell her." I felt nauseous. Actually nauseous. Like my body rejected the information before my mind could process it. Ryan stood up suddenly. "What the fuck is happening?" Melissa looked between them. Mom finally spoke through sobs. "There was someone before your father. Your father. Not Dad. Not Richard. Your father." That word split me open. I remember gripping the edge of the patio table because my knees literally weakened. "Before." She nodded. "I got pregnant very young. Richard and I had just started dating again after a breakup. Again. After a breakup. I could already see the shape forming. He chose to raise you. Chose. I hated that word instantly. Like I was a charity project. Ryan exploded first. "So Emily's not actually our full sister. Actually." That word too. I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I saw distance where love used to be. Not grief. Calculation. My father finally spoke. "She is your sister." But his voice sounded exhausted, ancient. Melissa started crying quietly now too. Meanwhile, I couldn't cry at all. Shock can feel strangely mechanical. Like your emotions are standing outside the room watching. I asked the question that mattered most. "Who is he?" My mother whispered his name was Daniel Monroe. Was it? Past tense. He died in 1998. I sat back slowly in the lawn chair. The world tilted. 42 years old, and my real father had been dead for 26 years. I never met him. Never knew his face. Nothing. Ryan rubbed both hands over his head. "This is insane." I looked at my father. "Did you ever want to tell me?" And there it was. The question underneath every other question. Did you love me honestly? Or were you performing obligation? He looked straight at me then. "Yes." One word. But I didn't know what it meant. Yes, he wanted to tell me. Yes, he loved me. Yes, I ruined everything. I couldn't decode him anymore. My mother tried reaching for my hand. I pulled away instinctively. And I swear the hurt on her face almost broke me despite everything. That's the awful thing about betrayal inside families. Love doesn't evaporate immediately. It rots slowly while still recognizable. I left 20 minutes later. Nobody stopped me except Dad. Not Richard. Dad. He followed me to my car as fireworks cracked faintly in neighboring streets. "Emily's." I turned. He looked smaller somehow. "I'm sorry." I asked the question I'd apparently been carrying my entire life without knowing it. "Why was I always different to you?" His face collapsed. "You worse." But we both knew that wasn't true. Not fully. Maybe he tried, maybe he even believed he succeeded. But children feel the difference between earned love and chosen responsibility. Tiny hesitations, slight distance, invisible math. I drove home sobbing so hard I had to pull over twice. Not graceful crying either. Animal grief. The kind that tears through your chest. I sat in a CVS parking lot at 10:14 p.m. staring at those DNA papers under fluorescent lights, while strangers bought toothpaste 10 feet away. 42 years. Gone. Or maybe rewritten. Which is somehow worse. The next morning my mother called 14 times. I ignored everyone. Then Melissa texted. "Please don't disappear. None of this changes you being my sister." I stared at the message for 10 full minutes. Then another arrived. "Ryan's upset, but he'll calm down." Upset. Interesting word choice. Not heartbroken, not protective, upset. Like this was inconvenience instead of identity detonation. By Sunday afternoon, Ryan finally called himself. You should have handled that privately. That was his opening sentence. Not are you okay? Not this must be hard. Handled. Like I'd spilled wine on the carpet. I said I didn't exactly plan it. Well, now everybody's talking about it. I laughed then, sharp and ugly. God forbid the neighbours survive family gossip. You know what I meaned. No, Ryan, I actually don't. He exhaled heavily. I just think Dad's hurting. And there it was again. Dad. Possessive. His dad. Not mine. I asked quietly, do you still see me the same way? Too long a pause. That pause changed everything more than words could have. Finally he said, of course. But engineers understand delayed stress responses. Hesitation tells the truth before language catches up. After we hung up, I sat alone in my condo kitchen listening to the refrigerator hum. I kept replaying childhood memories differently now. Why Grandma Evelyn never included me in the Carter grandchildren ornament tradition until years later. Why relatives sometimes said I looked nothing like Richard. Why my mother hovered nervously anytime conversations drifted toward genetics. The architecture of my life had hidden rooms. And suddenly all the walls were moving. 3 days later, I met my mother for coffee because avoiding her forever felt impossible. She looked 10 years older walking into that cafe. I never wanted this to hurt you, she said immediately. I almost laughed at the absurdity. What exactly did you think it would do? People stared. I lowered my voice. She told me about Daniel Monroe. They dated briefly in 1981 during one of her breakups with Richard. Daniel was charismatic, restless, worked construction jobs around Cincinnati, played guitar badly, smoked too much. Then she discovered she was pregnant. Richard came back. Daniel wanted nothing serious. Richard offered stability. So she married Richard 6 weeks before I was born. I listened silently. Then I asked, did Dad know for sure? Yes. From the beginning. Yes. That hurt more than anything. Not because he knew. Because they both looked me in the eyes for 4 decades and maintained the lie together. My mother cried again. We thought we were protecting you. No, I said quietly, you were protecting yourselves. That landed. She looked down immediately. Then she told me something that made my stomach drop. There was another reason we didn't tell you. I already hated the sentence before it ended. Daniel's family didn't know about you. I blinked. What? He died in a motorcycle accident in March 1998. His parents were elderly. We thought it would complicate things. Complicate. Such a clean word for theft. You stole my chance to know them. My mother whispered, we were scared. Fear, shame, convenience, those are the real architects of family secrets. I left without hugging her. For the next month I barely slept. I started researching Daniel Monroe obsessively. Public records, old newspaper archives, social media. I found one grainy photo from a 1997 local softball tournament. Same eyes as mine. That ruined me. You spend 42 years wondering why your face never fully matched anyone at Thanksgiving. Then suddenly there he is smiling from a faded newspaper, clipping with your exact mouth. I cried on my office bathroom floor for 20 minutes. Work became difficult. Structural engineering requires certainty, measurements, predictability, load calculations. My own life no longer obeyed those principles. Then came the second betrayal. On August 11th, my father suffered a massive stroke. Melissa called me at 6:42 a.m. Dad's at Riverside Methodist, you need to come now. Need. Funny how quickly biology stopped mattering during emergencies. I drove 90 miles an hour the entire way. When I arrived, Ryan was outside the ICU arguing with a nurse about visitation. My mother looked destroyed. Dad was unconscious. Machines everywhere. I stood beside his bed staring at the man who raised me, wondering if blood actually mattered at all when someone had taught you how to survive storms. I took his hand, and despite everything, it still felt like my father's hand. Rough, warm, familiar. He died 2 days later at 3:17 a.m. The funeral was unbearable. Not because of grief alone. Because grief mixed with confusion becomes something radioactive. People kept saying things like, "You were such a good daughter. He loved you so much. You were his pride and joy." And every sentence cut 2 directions simultaneously. After the burial, Ryan got drunk again. In my parents' kitchen, surrounded by casseroles and half-empty coffee cups, he muttered, "At least the estate stuff should be straightforward now." I stared at him. Melissa snapped, "Ryan. What, I'm being practical?" No, he was revealing himself. There's a difference. A week later we met with my father's attorney, Harold Bennett, a thin grey-haired man who'd known my parents since before I was born. The office smelled like dust and leather bindings. Very old money Midwest. Harold adjusted his glasses. Before we discussed the estate, Richard left specific instructions regarding a sealed letter. My mother looked confused. Ryan impatient. Melissa anxious. Then Harold turned directly toward me. "It's for Emily." The room changed temperature instantly. Ryan frowned. "What?" Harold slid a large envelope across the table. My name written in my father's handwriting. Not Richard. Dad. My hands shook opening it. Inside was a 7-page letter dated July 18th, 2024. 2 weeks after the barbecue. I can still recite parts from memory. "Emily, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and I suspect you are hurting in ways I helped create. There are truths I should have given you years earlier. Cowardice disguised itself as protection for too long. You were never an obligation to me. You were the first baby I ever held, the first child who trusted me completely, the first person who made me understand that love is not biology, love is repetition, presence, choice. I know I failed you in certain ways. I saw the moments you noticed distance in our family, and instead of correcting them loudly, I hoped loving you quietly would be enough. It was. I stopped reading because I couldn't breathe. My mother was already crying softly. Ryan looked uncomfortable now. Melissa covered her mouth. I kept going. "Richard is the name on your birth certificate, but Dad is the name you gave me. I valued that more than I ever told you. The truth is, I was afraid. Afraid if you learned about Daniel, you would look at me differently. Afraid you would leave. Selfish fears, human ones. But hear this clearly, you are my daughter in every way that has ever mattered." My vision blurred completely. Then came the part none of us expected. I also know there may be conflict regarding the estate, so I made my intentions legally undeniable. Harold quietly slid another document forward. Dad had divided everything equally between all 3 of us. But there was more. A separate investment account worth $487,000 had been left solely to me. Ryan exploded immediately. "What the hell is this?" Harold remained calm. "Richard established the account in 2009. For her only." "Yes. Why?" Harold glanced toward me before answering. Richard stated it was to compensate for a lifetime of imbalance. Silence detonated across the room. My mother started sobbing harder. Melissa looked stunned. Ryan stood up violently enough to knock his chair backward. "This is insane." I looked at the letter again. "There were times I failed to defend you the way I should have. This is not guilt money, it is acknowledgement." Ryan snapped, acknowledgement for what? And finally, the truth surfaced fully into daylight. Dad knew. He knew I'd been treated differently. Maybe subtly, maybe unintentionally. But he knew. All those years I told myself I was oversensitive. I was. The room blurred from tears. Ryan kept ranting. She's already not biologically. Melissa cut him off instantly. Don't you dare finish that sentence. But the damage was done. Not biologically. There it was. The sentence underneath every silence since July. I stood slowly. You know what hurts most, I said quietly. Nobody answered. You all got to grow up certain who you belonged to, certain where you came from, certain you were wanted without conditions. Ryan looked away. I continued. I spent 42 years trying to earn comfort that came naturally to the rest of you. My mother whispered, Emily. No, you don't get to interrupt this anymore. Even I barely recognized my own voice. Steady, controlled, like steel under pressure. I was the child who adapted, the child who performed gratitude, the child who sensed something missing and blamed herself for it. Nobody spoke. I looked at Ryan's. And the second you found out we didn't fully share DNA, you hesitated. He tried denying it. I didn't. You did. Silence confirmed it. Then I looked at my father's letter one more time. And strangely, something settled inside me. Not peace, but clarity. Engineers know damaged structures sometimes can't be restored to original form. The goal becomes stabilization, preventing further collapse. That's what healing really is. Not erasing damage. Learning how to stand afterward. I took my copy of the letter and walked out of the office. Ryan didn't follow. Neither did my mother. Only Melissa came after me. She grabbed my arm gently in the parking lot. You're still my sister. I believed her. That's the difference. I actually believed her. Over the next year, my relationship with my family changed permanently. Ryan and I barely speak now except on holidays. Not because of one comment. Because DNA revealed character as much as biology. My mother and I are rebuilding, slowly. Painfully. Some days I understand her fear. Other days I can barely look at her without feeling robbed. Both things can exist simultaneously. That's adulthood. I eventually contacted Daniel Monroe's surviving sister through Facebook. Her name is Valerie. The first message she sent me simply said, "You have his eyes." I cried for an hour. She mailed me photographs, old letters, stories. Apparently Daniel loved thunderstorms and hated mushrooms, and played guitar terribly exactly like my mother said. Apparently he never knew I existed. That grief is complicated too. You can mourn someone you never met, especially when you spent your whole life unknowingly searching for your own reflection. The inheritance changed practical things, of course. I paid off my condo, started my own engineering consulting firm in February 2025. Financial security matters. Anyone pretending otherwise is lying. But money wasn't the real inheritance. The letter was. Validation is priceless when you've spent decades doubting your own reality. Last October, I visited my father's grave alone. Cold morning, wet leaves everywhere. I brought coffee because he always drank it black and terrible. I sat there quietly and finally said out loud, "You were my dad. Not perfect. Not innocent. But mine. And maybe I was his too." A few weeks ago, Melissa hosted another family barbecue. Smaller this time. Quieter. Ryan stayed mostly inside watching football. My mother looked older but softer somehow. At one point, Melissa's youngest daughter climbed into my lap holding a sparkler. "Aunt Emily," she whispered, "Mom says you build bridges." I smiled. Sometimes. She thought about that seriously. Do bridges ever break? I looked out across the yard, where old wounds still floated invisibly between people. Then I answered honestly. All the time. She frowned. Then what's the point? And maybe this is the closest thing I have to wisdom now. I told her, because some things are worth building even if they don't last forever. She seemed satisfied with that. Kids usually recognize truth faster than adults do. When I left that night, my mother hugged me tightly at the front door. Not carefully. Not politely. Fully. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like someone standing outside the frame trying to earn a place inside it. I felt like a woman who survived the collapse of one identity and built another from the wreckage. Stronger. More honest. Entirely her own. If you're reading this while carrying some secret ache about where you belong, listen to me carefully. Blood explains biology. It does not automatically explain love. And family isn't always the people who made you. Sometimes it's the people who stayed. Sometimes it's the people who finally tell the truth. Sometimes it's the version of yourself you become after surviving both. You are allowed to walk away from people who only love you conditionally. You are allowed to mourn the parents you deserved. You are allowed to rebuild. These days my life is very quiet. I wake up early. I run 3 miles most mornings. I drink coffee on my condo balcony while reviewing bridge inspection reports before work. Last Tuesday, it rained hard before sunrise. I sat there listening to thunder roll across Columbus while holding one of the old photographs Valerie mailed me. Daniel Monroe at 23, leaning against a pickup truck, smiling crookedly. Beside it sat my father's letter, folded soft from rereading. 2 men. One gave me blood. One gave me a life. And somehow, after all the betrayal and grief and years of silence, I finally understand that I don't have to choose between those truths to belong to myself. About 3 months after my father died, I found myself standing in the lighting aisle of a Home Depot at 8:40 on a Wednesday night, crying over fluorescent bulbs. Not dramatic crying, not movie crying. Just exhausted, silent tears sliding down my face while a couple argued nearby about kitchen paint colors. Grief does that sometimes. It sneaks through ordinary cracks. The light bulbs weren't really the problem. It was the fact that my father used to replace every burnt-out bulb in my condo before I even noticed them. He kept a little toolbox in the trunk of his Buick with labels made from masking tape and black marker. Flashlight BATTRIS, Philips HEADS, electrical. He believed preparedness was love. And suddenly there I was, 42 years old, holding a pack of GE soft white bulbs and realizing nobody would quietly take care of small things for me anymore. Not him. Not the version of my family I thought existed. I sat in my car afterward, gripping the steering wheel while rain hammered the windshield, and I remember thinking something ugly and honest. I don't know who I belong to anymore. That feeling stayed for months. People talk about identity like it's emotional or philosophical, but it's physical too. It lives in your nervous system, in your habits, in the assumptions underneath every memory. When those assumptions collapse, your body notices before your mind catches up. I started forgetting things. Meetings, passwords, whether I'd eaten lunch. One afternoon at work, I stared at a steel load calculation for nearly 20 minutes before realizing I entered the same number incorrectly 3 times. My assistant Priya touched my office door gently. You okay? I answered automatically. Yes. Then immediately burst into tears. Poor woman looked horrified. I laughed while crying, which somehow made it worse. Sorry, I said, wiping my face. Apparently my nervous breakdown had scheduling flexibility. She brought me tea without asking questions. That kind of kindness can save a person, especially when your own family suddenly feels unstable. The hardest part wasn't even learning I had another biological father. It was realizing how many tiny moments throughout my life now carried hidden meanings. I kept replaying childhood scenes differently. Like Christmas morning 1993, Ryan got a Super Nintendo. Melissa got an American Girl doll. I got a hardcover atlas and a sweater. At the time I told myself it was because I liked books. But now I wondered if my mother overcompensated by making me the mature child, easier, less emotionally demanding. Or 8th grade graduation. Ryan and Melissa's grandparents attended every school event. Mine skipped most of mine. Back then I thought maybe they were just busy. Now I wondered if Grandma Evelyn saw me every time and remembered an affair nobody discussed. There's a specific humiliation in realizing your childhood may have been shaped by information everyone else already knew. Like being the last person to understand the joke. One Saturday in October, I finally opened the storage boxes from my hall closet, where I'd shoved everything connected to the DNA results. The papers, the photographs Valerie mailed, Dad's letter. I spread everything across my dining table like evidence in a criminal investigation. Maybe because engineers need patterns, we need structures, explanations. I kept hoping if I organized the facts carefully enough, the pain would become logical. It didn't. I studied Daniel Monroe's face for hours. The resemblance terrified me now that I couldn't unsee it. Same eyes, same chin. Even our posture looked similar in photographs. Meanwhile, my father Richard existed everywhere in my behavior instead. The way I folded towels. The way I checked weather reports obsessively before road trips. The way silence felt natural instead of uncomfortable. One man built my face. The other built the architecture underneath it. That realization should have comforted me. Instead, it made everything messier. Around that time, Ryan started openly fighting the will. Not legally at first. Emotionally. He called Melissa, constantly complaining about special treatment. As if the money mattered more than what it represented. One night Melissa finally told me the truth. He thinks Dad loved you more. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was unbelievable. Ryan got every visible sign of approval our entire lives. I know. No, Melissa, you don't understand. Dad taught him baseball, taught him to shave, helped him buy his first truck. They went fishing every summer. I know. He barely hugged me. Melissa looked down quietly. Then she said something that stopped me cold. Maybe because loving you hurt him. I stared at her. What does that mean? She twisted her wedding ring nervously. I think Dad always felt guilty, and people get strange around guilt. That sentence lodged inside me like splintered glass. Because suddenly so many memories shifted again. Dad hovering near me after arguments. Dad secretly paying off part of my student loans in 2007 without telling anyone. Dad defending me fiercely whenever extended family criticized me. Quiet love. Careful love. Love filtered through shame and fear. Still love. But damaged. I hated that damage existed at all. By November, my mother started asking to see me more often. At first, I resisted. Then one rainy Tuesday, she showed up unexpectedly outside my office, holding a cardboard bakery box from Resch's. My favorite cinnamon rolls. The same ones she used to buy after dentist appointments when I was little. I know you're angry, she said softly, but please don't erase me completely. That nearly broke me. Because despite everything, I didn't want to erase her. I wanted impossible things instead. I wanted my childhood to remain real, while also understanding the truth about it. I wanted betrayal without malice. Love without deception. But humans are rarely clean enough for those combinations. We sat in my office for nearly 2 hours after everyone else left. She finally told me details she'd hidden my entire life. The affair with Daniel wasn't romantic the way she described initially. It happened during a period when she and my father had separated after Richard discovered she'd accumulated thousands in gambling debt. I felt ashamed, she admitted. So you slept with someone else? Yes. The honesty landed heavily between us. She explained that Daniel never knew about the pregnancy because she ended things before confirming it. Then Richard returned, and despite everything, he chose to stay. I told him you might not be his, she whispered. He said it didn't matter. I swallowed hard. But it did matter. Tears filled her eyes immediately. Yes, at least she admitted it. That was new. No pretending. No smoothing rough edges. Just truth sitting naked between us. She stared out my office window for a long moment before speaking again. Your father loved you so much it scared him. I shook my head. You can't keep rewriting this into something noble. I'm not. Yes, you are. My voice sharpened. You lied to me for 42 years. She flinched visibly, then quietly said, every year that passed made it harder. That unfortunately I understood. Secrets calcify over time. Families adapt around them like trees growing around buried fences. Eventually nobody remembers where the original damage began. That night after she left, I reread Dad's letter again. One paragraph haunted me more than the others. There were times I watched you trying harder than the others for the same affection, and I hated myself for noticing without correcting it fully. He knew it. God, he knew it. Not imagined. Not exaggerated. Known. That validation felt both healing and devastating. Like finally getting proof your house had been slowly leaking gas for decades. You're relieved you weren't crazy. But you're still poisoned. Thanksgiving that year was awkward enough to qualify as performance art. Melissa hosted because nobody could handle returning to my parents' house yet. Ryan barely spoke to me except one stiff hello near the mashed potatoes. His wife Jenna acted overly cheerful, which somehow felt worse. Meanwhile, my mother looked perpetually close to tears. At one point, Melissa's daughter Ava asked innocently, "Mommy, what's a half-sister?" The entire table froze. Ryan muttered, "Jesus Christ." Melissa shot him a glare sharp enough to cut glass. Kids know when adults are lying. They may not understand details, but they feel instability instantly. I excused myself to the bathroom mostly so I could breathe. A few minutes later, Ryan followed me into the hallway. "We need to talk." I folded my arms. About the way things are now. I waited. He rubbed the back of his neck, already irritated. "You've made everyone uncomfortable." I actually stared at him in disbelief. "I made everyone uncomfortable. You know what I mean." "No, explain it clearly." His jaw tightened. "Everything revolves around this now. This. Interesting choice again. Not my pains. Not our family collapse. Just this." I said quietly, "Your angry dad left me money." "That's not true." "It is." "No, I'm angry because suddenly I'm the asshole for being surprised." I looked at him carefully then. "You were more than surprised, Ryan." He crossed his arms defensively. "You're not biologically Dad." There it was again. Like he needed to keep pressing the bruise. I stepped closer. "And that changes things." "How?" He opened his mouth. Closed it. Because he couldn't say it out loud without sounding exactly like what he was becoming. I finished for him. "You think blood matters more than 42 years. That's not what I said." "It's exactly what you said." He exhaled hard. "You don't understand what this did to Dad." Anger finally snapped through me fully then. "No, Ryan, you don't understand what this did to me." My voice echoed down the hallway. For 42 years, I wondered why I always felt slightly outside this family. Then I discover everybody else knew the reason except me. That's not fair. No, you got certainty your entire life. I got confusion disguised as normal. He looked away first. Not me. That mattered. I lowered my voice. You know the worst part. Silence. I still miss him every day. That cracked something briefly in his expression. Because grief complicates resentment. Neither of us knew how to mourn the same man anymore. Christmas was worse. My mother insisted on keeping traditions alive, which mostly resulted in everyone pretending not to notice the emotional crater beneath the wrapping paper. At one point, she handed me a small box wrapped in silver paper. Inside was Dad's old compass. Bronze, heavy, worn smooth around the edges. I looked at her confused. He wanted you to have it. My throat tightened instantly. Dad carried that compass on every camping trip when we were kids. I remembered being 10 years old, sitting beside him near Alum Creek State Park while he showed me how True North worked. People think maps matter most, he told me, but direction matters more. I held the compass so tightly my palm hurt. Ryan watched from across the room with an unreadable expression. Later that evening, after too much wine and too little emotional restraint, Jenna cornered me in the kitchen. I think Ryan's just struggling because he feels replaced. I blinked slowly. Replaced by who? By you. I laughed once in disbelief. Ryan spent 45 years as the golden child. You know what I mean. Apparently everyone did except me. That became the recurring theme of the year. Everybody knew what things meant, except the person living inside them. In January 2025, Valerie invited me to Cincinnati to meet Daniel Monroe's remaining relatives. I almost didn't go. The idea felt disloyal somehow. Then I remembered my entire identity had already been built on silence. So I drove down on a grey Saturday morning with my stomach in knots. Valerie lived in a small blue house near Mount Airy Forest. Wind chimes on the porch, bird feeders everywhere. She hugged me before I even got fully out of the car. And reader, I need you to understand something. Nobody in my life had ever looked at me with instant recognition before. Not curiosity. Recognition. Like seeing a familiar face after years apart. Inside her house, family photographs covered entire walls. And there he was everywhere. Daniel. At 16. At 22. Holding fish. Holding guitars. Laughing beside motorcycles. And every room contained tiny pieces of myself I'd never understood. Same crooked smile. Same stance. Same habit of tilting our heads slightly while listening. It felt like stepping into an alternate universe where my face had existed all along. Valerie made coffee while her husband Frank awkwardly pretended not to stare at me. Finally he blurted out, "You laugh exactly like him." I burst into tears immediately. Not graceful tears either. Deep body grief. Because how many parts of myself had I inherited from strangers without knowing? Valerie cried too. Then she brought out an old shoebox. Inside were letters, ticket stubs, photographs. A whole human life I should have known existed. At one point, she handed me a picture from 1981. Daniel leaning against a motorcycle beside my mother. Young, beautiful, smiling. I stared at my mother's face from decades before betrayal hardened everything. Valerie touched my hand gently. He would have wanted to know you. That sentence shattered me more completely than any DNA result. Not because it solved anything. Because it introduced a new grief entirely. The grief of a relationship stolen before it began. On the drive home, I pulled over twice from crying. Again. So much of this story involves parking lots. Maybe because there's nowhere elegant to collapse. A week later, Ryan called unexpectedly. I heard you met them. Not hello. Not how are you. Just accusation disguised as conversation. Yes. Long silence. Then so what now? I leaned against my kitchen counter. What does that mean? Are they your family now? There was genuine fear underneath the hostility suddenly. And for the first time, I understood something important. Ryan wasn't just angry. He was threatened. Not by money. By instability. Families build identities collectively. Roles become structural supports. Golden son. Reliable daughter. Peacemaker. Problem child. When one role changes, everyone feels the shift. I answered honestly. I don't know. He sighed heavily. I just miss when things made sense. That sentence softened me despite myself. Because yes, me too. God, me too. But sense built on lies isn't stability. It's denial with good furniture. In March, my mother finally sold the family house. Walking through it one last time nearly destroyed me. Every room carried ghosts now. Ryan's height mark still penciled inside the laundry closet. Melissa's old dance trophies in the basement. The kitchen where Dad made pancakes every Sunday morning while humming badly off-key. My childhood bedroom still painted pale yellow. I stood inside it touching the windowsill where I used to sit during thunderstorms. Dad would always knock twice before entering. 2 soft taps. Always. I suddenly remembered something I hadn't thought about in decades. When I was 13, I asked him directly once if I was different from Ryan and Melissa. We'd been driving home from a hardware store, rain tapping the windshield. He gripped the steering wheel tightly. What do you mean? I don't know, different. Long pause. Then he said quietly, you think too much, Emmy. At the time I interpreted it as dismissal. Now I wonder if it was fear. In the garage, buried beneath old extension cords and paint cans, I found Dad's toolbox. The same one from the Home Depot breakdown months earlier. Inside was a folded note taped beneath the lid. My name in his handwriting. Just one sentence. In case you ever need to fix something yourself. Underneath sat a complete socket wrench, set still in plastic packaging. I sat on the garage floor crying so hard I could barely breathe. That was my father. Not grand speeches. Preparedness. Quiet provision. Love hidden inside practical things. He knew he was dying. And he still thought about whether I'd have tools. That kind of love counts. I don't care what DNA says. By spring, therapy finally started helping. Dr. Levin specialized in family trauma and once told me something that changed how I viewed everything. Children don't experience secrets as information gaps, she said. They experience them as emotional weather. God. Yes. That explained my entire childhood. I grew up sensing storms nobody acknowledged. Tension without explanation. Distance without language. And because children naturally blame themselves for instability, I built an entire identity around compensating for invisible problems. Overachieving. People-pleasing. Hyper-independence. Even becoming an engineer suddenly made psychological sense. I spent my life trying to create stable structures because internally nothing ever felt fully secure. Healing didn't arrive dramatically. No cinematic closure. Just small shifts. Sleeping through the night occasionally. Laughing without guilt. Understanding that multiple truths could coexist. My mother betrayed me. My father loved me. Ryan failed me. Melissa tried. Daniel mattered. Richard mattered too. Humans are complicated enough to hold contradictions simultaneously. Last month, Ava had a school project about family trees. Melissa warned me beforehand because she didn't want me blindsided. Apparently Ava asked, can people have two grandpas? Melissa told her yes. Then Ava asked, can people have two dads? Again yes. Kids adapt to truth much faster than adults poisoned by shame. Ava apparently nodded thoughtfully and said, then Aunt Emily got extra love. I cried when Melissa told me that. Because maybe that's the healthier interpretation. Not divided love. Expanded love. Still painful, still messy. But not empty. These days I keep Dad's compass beside my bed. Daniel's photograph sits on my bookshelf. Neither man cancels the other out. And maybe identity isn't a bridge connecting only one shore. Maybe it's a series of supports carrying weight from multiple directions at once. Some biological, some chosen, some broken and repaired so many times they become stronger at the fracture points. I still don't fully know who I am after all this. But I know who I'm no longer trying to be. Not the grateful outsider. Not the quiet compensator. Not the child endlessly auditioning for belonging. Just Emily, 42 years old, structural engineer, daughter of one man by blood and another by choice, still standing after collapse. And if you've spent your life sensing invisible cracks nobody else acknowledged, please hear me. You were not weak for noticing them. You were paying attention. By April of 2025, people around me started acting like I should have been better already. That's the thing nobody warns you about with grief tied to betrayal. There's an expiration date people silently expect you to honor. After enough months pass, they stop asking how you're doing with sincerity. Their eyes start saying still. Especially family. Especially the ones who helped cause the damage. But trauma doesn't move linearly. It loops, revisits, echoes. Some mornings I woke up functional and calm. Other mornings I'd hear a random phrase, real father, blood relative, family history, and feel like somebody punched directly through my ribs. One Thursday afternoon, I was reviewing foundation stress reports for a municipal parking structure downtown when my phone buzzed with a text from Ryan. Mom fell in the grocery store, St. Anne's ER. No greeting. No punctuation. Just information. I stared at the message for a long moment before grabbing my keys. And yes, despite everything, I went immediately. Because betrayal doesn't automatically erase love. Sometimes it just makes love exhausting. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and stale coffee. My mother sat upright in a bed with a bruised wrist and dramatic embarrassment written all over her face. I'm fine, she insisted the second she saw me. You're 71, I replied. Falling is not fine. Ryan stood near the window scrolling through his phone. Melissa sat beside Mom holding her purse. For a few minutes everything felt almost normal. Then the doctor entered asking routine family medical questions. Any family history of heart conditions. The entire room went still. Again, that silence. That awful loaded silence. The doctor glanced between us awkwardly. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was absurd how quickly these moments still arrived. I'm adopted biologically, I said flatly. My mother closed her eyes. Ryan shifted uncomfortably. Melissa looked sad more than anything. The doctor nodded professionally and moved on, but the damage was already done. Another reminder. Another tiny emotional ambush. Later, while Melissa went to get coffee, Ryan cornered me near the vending machines. You didn't have to say it like that. I stared at him. Like what? Adopted biologically. What term would you prefer? Surprise relative, genetic clerical error? You know what I meaned. There it was again. That phrase had become the soundtrack of our relationship. You know what I meaned. As if emotional vagueness could soften cruelty. I folded my arms. No, Ryan, I actually don't anymore. He rubbed his forehead hard. You've changed. I laughed softly. Yeah, finding out your life was partially fictional tends to do that. That's not fair. What's not fair is everybody else having years to process information I learned at a barbecue beside potato salad. That shut him up briefly. Then he muttered something that changed the entire direction of our relationship. You always act like you had it hardest. I just looked at him. Really looked at him. And for the first time, I understood my brother wasn't emotionally equipped to handle anyone else's pain if it threatened his position in the family hierarchy. Even now, even after all this, he still needed to be the injured party. I asked quietly, do you know how many times I wondered what was wrong with me growing up? His expression shifted slightly. Not enough, but slightly. I used to rehearse conversations before family dinners, I continued. Did you know that? What? I'd sit in my car outside Mom and Dad's house planning how to sound less annoying, less sensitive, less extra. Ryan frowned. You weren't treated badly. No, I admitted, that's what made it confusing. Because that was the truth. I wasn't abused. I wasn't hated. I was loved with restraint. And children notice restrained love almost more painfully than open cruelty. Open cruelty gives clarity. Restraint gives confusion. Ryan leaned against the vending machine. You think Dad loved you differently? I swallowed hard. I think he was afraid to. That landed harder than I expected. Even Ryan looked shaken by it. Because deep down I think he knew too. Not consciously maybe, but emotionally. Families always know more than they admit. Mom was discharged that evening with a sprained wrist and strict instructions to take it easy, which she immediately ignored. A week later, she invited me over to her new condo for lunch. Smaller place, quiet, too clean in the way homes become after grief removes half the occupants. Dad's absence existed everywhere. No muddy boots near the door. No weather radio muttering in the background. No terrible black coffee brewing at 5 a.m. While making sandwiches, Mom suddenly asked, "Do you hate me?" Directly. No dramatics. Just tired honesty. I looked down at the cutting board for a long moment. I don't know. That was the most truthful answer. Because hate would have been simpler. Cleaner. Instead, I felt this enormous tangled mass of love. Anger, pity, grief, and disappointment, all living together inside me like exposed wiring. She nodded slowly like she expected that answer. Then she quietly said, I hated myself for years. I looked up sharply. What? For lying to you. Something about her voice felt different then. Less defensive. More human. She sat down heavily at the kitchen table. Your father used to say we should tell you after you turned 18. My chest tightened. He wanted to tell me. Yes. What changed? She looked ashamed. Me. The honesty hurt worse somehow. She explained that every year she postponed the conversation because she feared losing me. Or losing Richard. Or both. And eventually the lie became fused to the family itself. I thought if we loved you enough it wouldn't matter. I stared at her. That's not how truth works. Tears slid down her face immediately. I know. And maybe that was the first genuinely productive conversation we'd had since July. Not because anything got fixed, but because she stopped trying to turn herself into a misunderstood martyr. She admitted selfishness, fear, weakness, real things. Before I left, she handed me an old manila folder. I found these while packing. Inside were school drawings, report cards, every birthday card I'd ever made Dad. And buried underneath them, one photograph I'd never seen before. My mother holding me as a newborn in the hospital. Beside her stood Richard. Dad. Young, terrified, exhausted. But smiling at me. Not politely. Not performatively. Purely. I stared at that photograph so long my vision blurred. He knew then, I whispered. Mom nodded. Yes. And he stayed. Yes. That picture lived in my purse for weeks afterward. Proof that my father's love existed before obligation fully complicated it. As spring deepened, my relationship with Valerie Monroe also grew stronger. Every Sunday evening, we talked on the phone for hours. She told me stories about Daniel. How he once drove 3 hours to rescue a stranded friend at 2 a.m. How he played guitar badly but enthusiastically. How he cried during sad commercials despite pretending to be tough. I absorbed every detail greedily. Like reconstructing a lost language. One night Valerie suddenly asked, "Do you want to meet his son?" I blinked. What? Daniel had a boy a few years before he died, Tyler. I nearly dropped the phone. A brother. Another brother. At 42 years old. My entire life had turned into emotional genealogy roulette. Apparently Tyler lived in Lexington, Kentucky, worked as a paramedic and knew about me already. How does he feel? Valerie laughed softly. Mostly curious. Curious. Imagine being curious about discovering your father had another child. I spent 2 weeks debating whether to meet him. Then finally agreed. We chose a diner halfway between Columbus and Lexington because apparently life-changing meetings in my life now exclusively happened in emotionally neutral public places. I arrived 30 minutes early from nerves. By the time Tyler walked in, I already knew instantly who he was. Same eyes again. Same shoulders. Same mouth. Biology is terrifying sometimes. He stopped beside the booth, staring at me with open disbelief. Wow, that was his first word. I laughed nervously. Yes. He sat down slowly. This is weird. Extremely. Then suddenly we were both laughing. Not because anything was funny. Because reality occasionally becomes too surreal for dignity. Tyler was 36, divorced, one daughter, calm energy, gentle voice. Within 20 minutes, I noticed something unnerving. We had identical hand gestures. Same habit of tapping fingers while thinking. Same crooked half smile. I felt like I was watching pieces of myself move around outside my body. At one point, he shook his head slowly. My dad would have lost his mind over this. You think? Oh, absolutely. He always wanted more family around. That sentence hurt in a strangely beautiful way. Tyler reached into his backpack eventually and pulled out an old photograph. Daniel holding toddler Tyler at a county fair. Mom kept this one because she said it was his happiest summer. I stared at my biological father's face again. Then Tyler quietly said something that rearranged something inside me. You know none of this is your fault, right? Instant tears. Because logically I knew that already. But emotionally children always internalize family secrets as personal failures. Tyler understood instinctively because he stood outside the original damage. That perspective mattered. We spent 4 hours talking. By the end, something unexpected happened. I stopped feeling divided. Not fully healed, but less split apart internally. Maybe identity expands instead of fractures when given more truth. A few days later, Ryan called again. Apparently, Melissa had told him about Tyler. You met your new brother. The bitterness in his voice was unmistakable. I closed my eyes briefly. Ryan, no, seriously, you replaced us fast. That stunned me silent. Because only someone emotionally committed to victimhood could interpret my search for biological truth as betrayal against them. You think this is easy for me. I think you're enjoying the attention. That sentence did it. Months of restraint finally cracked. You know what? I snapped. You're right, Ryan. Discovering my entire identity was built on withheld information has been a fantastic experience. Don't be dramatic. Dramatic. I laughed sharply. I lost my father 3 weeks after discovering he wasn't biologically mine. He was your father. Exactly, I shouted. Silence. Heavy breathing on both ends. Then I said the thing I'd avoided for months. You know why this bothers you so much? He didn't answer. Because Dad chose me. That landed like a bomb. Immediately I regretted saying it. Not because it was false. Because it was cruel. Ryan went dead silent. Then quietly said, "Wow," and hung up. I sat on my kitchen floor afterward shaking. Not triumphant. Sick. Pain turns people sharp if they aren't careful. Even justified pain. Melissa called an hour later furious. What the hell happened? I told her. Long silence. Then she sighed heavily. You both need therapy. Honestly, fair. But underneath the conflict lived a deeper truth nobody wanted to acknowledge directly. Dad's choice complicated biology for all of us. Because if love could be chosen that powerfully, then blood alone stopped feeling special. And Ryan depended on blood being special. It anchored him. Meanwhile, my entire life now proved otherwise. In June, my firm landed a major municipal contract, restoring 2 historic pedestrian bridges near the Scioto Mile. Biggest project of my independent career so far. Normally Dad would have been the first person I called. Instead, I visited his grave after signing the paperwork. I sat there in work clothes, holding the contract folder, while cicadas screamed in nearby trees. You'd love this project, I told the headstone quietly. And suddenly I could hear his voice perfectly in memory. Bridges aren't built because the wind stops. I cried a little, then laughed a little too. Grief becomes less sharp eventually, less like a knife. More like carrying a stone in your pocket. Always there. Just lighter over time. Later that summer, Valerie mailed me another box of Daniel's belongings. Inside was an old leather journal from 1997. Mostly random notes, song lyrics, grocery lists. But one entry stopped my heart completely. I wonder sometimes if I'll ever have another kid. I think I'd be good at it now. I sat there holding those words while thunder rolled outside my condo windows. He never knew. That fact still destroys me in quiet moments. Not because I needed him to save me. Because every person deserves the chance to know where they come from. Secrets steal more than information. They steal possible love. By August, Mom and I had settled into a fragile kind of honesty. Not perfect. Not healed, but real. One afternoon while helping her assemble bookshelves in the condo, she suddenly said, "Your father carried your kindergarten picture in his wallet until the day he died." I stopped tightening the screwdriver. What? He showed it to people constantly. My throat tightened immediately. He was so proud of you, Emily. I sat back against the wall staring at unfinished shelves. Then why did I always feel slightly outside? Mom looked devastated. Because adults think children can't sense shame. That answer hit harder than anything else she'd ever said. Because there it was. The whole truth. I wasn't imagining distance. I was sensing hidden shame vibrating beneath the family structure my entire life. Not my shame. Theirs. And children absorb emotional weather like lungs absorb smoke. That realization changed something fundamental inside me. For the first time ever, I stopped viewing myself as deficient. I had simply been perceptive. There's a difference. A massive one. These days when I think about family, I think about structural load paths. In engineering, weight always travels somewhere. Stress transfers through beams, joints, foundations. Secrets work the same way. Parents think they can contain them neatly, but pressure always migrates. Somebody always carries it. Usually the child least equipped to understand why. For decades that child was me. Not anymore. Last weekend, Ava asked me to help build a model bridge for her science fair. We spent 3 hours at my dining table, surrounded by popsicle sticks and glue, while she talked non-stop about school drama and dinosaurs. At one point she squinted at the bridge carefully. What if it breaks? I smiled softly. Then we figure out why. She nodded seriously like that made perfect sense. Maybe healing is just that. Not pretending structures never fail. Learning how to examine the damage honestly enough to rebuild something stronger afterward. By September of 2025, the strangest part of my life wasn't the secret anymore. It was how normal everything looked from the outside. I still woke up at 5:45 every morning, still drank coffee too strong for most people, still reviewed bridge reports and soil analyses and municipal budgets, still argued with contractors about material delays and safety compliance. From a distance, I looked like a stable middle-aged woman with a successful engineering firm and decent posture. Meanwhile, internally, I was reconstructing my entire understanding of love, identity, and family from exposed debris. That's the thing about emotional collapse. Most of it happens invisibly. One Friday afternoon, I was standing beneath the Broad Street Bridge downtown, inspecting expansion joints with my project manager, Lewis, when he suddenly said, "You always notice stress before anyone else." I laughed lightly. Occupational hazard. But later that sentence stayed with me. Because yes, I did notice stress early. Tiny fractures, uneven weight distribution, hairline instability others ignored until failure became obvious. Not just in bridges. In people. In families. I think some children become hyper-aware because they have to. You grow up in emotional uncertainty long enough, your nervous system starts scanning constantly for structural weakness. That realization explained why I was always the first person to sense tension in a room. Why loud voices made my stomach knot instantly. Why I became easy and low maintenance as a child. I wasn't naturally calm. I was strategically careful. There's a difference. Around that same time, Melissa invited me over for wine after work. Her kids were at a sleepover. The house felt unusually quiet. She poured Cabernet into oversized, stemless glasses and sat across from me at the kitchen island looking exhausted. "Ryan's getting worse," she said finally. I sighed. "How?" He keeps saying Dad abandoned him emotionally. I blinked slowly. "What?" Melissa rubbed her temples. "He thinks the money Dad left you proves he loved you more." I actually laughed from disbelief. Dad spent 45 years revolving around Ryan. I know. No, seriously. He coached every baseball team, helped him buy his first house, went to every football game. Melissa nodded tiredly. I know. So where is this coming from? She hesitated too long. Then quietly admitted, because Ryan thinks love is finite. That sentence sat heavily between us. Because suddenly I understood something fundamental about my brother. To Ryan, love operated like inheritance, limited, competitive, distributed. If Dad loved me deeply despite biology, then Ryan's identity as the unquestioned son became unstable. And some people would rather rewrite reality than examine insecurity. Melissa swirled wine slowly. I think he always assumed Dad understood him best. I stared down into my glass. Maybe Dad understood me because he worried about me more. She looked up sharply. That's sad. Yes. It's also true. We sat quietly for a moment, Then Melissa surprised me. You know, I was jealous of you growing up, right? I looked at her in total confusion. Of me? You and Dad? I almost choked on wine. What are you talking about? She smiled sadly. You think Ryan was his favorite because they spent the most time together, but with you, Dad softened. That word hit me unexpectedly hard. Softened. Melissa leaned back against the counter. He was gentler with you. My chest tightened. I never saw that. Because you were inside it. Apparently everyone else spent years observing dynamics I couldn't fully interpret while living inside them. Melissa continued quietly. When you went to Purdue, Dad cried after dropping you off. I stared at her. My father did not cry. Oh, he absolutely did. That image completely shattered me. Because Dad had always seemed emotionally restrained to the point of invisibility. But maybe restraint and absence weren't the same thing. Maybe he loved me so carefully because he feared loving me too openly would expose everything. That possibility hurt almost more than distance itself. A week later, Ryan finally agreed to meet me for lunch after nearly 2 months of minimal contact. Neutral territory. A sports bar neither of us particularly liked. Classic emotionally damaged sibling strategy. He looked older than I remembered, more retired, grey spreading through his beard. For a few awkward minutes we talked about nothing important. Football. Work. Weather. Then finally I asked, "Do you actually resent me?" He stared at his beer. "I don't know. Honest at least." I nodded slowly. "That's fair." Long silence stretched between us. Then he quietly said, "Everything changed after July." Yes. I feel like I lost Dad twice. That sentence softened something inside me instantly. Because underneath all his anger lived grief. Messy, selfish, imperfect grief. But grief nonetheless. I leaned back carefully. You know what's strange? What? I spent 42 years feeling slightly disconnected from this family. Then I find out why, and somehow everybody else starts feeling disconnected instead. Ryan looked at me for a long moment, then finally asked the question buried beneath everything. Did you ever feel like Dad treated you differently? There it was. The truth nobody wanted to say aloud. I answered honestly. Yes. His jaw tightened. How? I thought carefully before answering. Not worse exactly, just cautious. Ryan frowned. What does that even mean? I searched for language precise enough. In engineering, if a structure's already damaged, you apply force differently, more carefully, more deliberately. That sounds depressing as hell. It kind of was. He rubbed his face. I never noticed. No, you wouldn't. Not cruelty. Just fact. Golden children rarely see imbalance, clearly because the system works for them. Ryan looked genuinely miserable suddenly. Dad loved you. I know. You really know that. I swallowed hard. Yes. Because I did. Finally. Not perfectly, not cleanly, but undeniably. Ryan nodded slowly. Then said something I never expected. I think he was scared of losing you. My throat tightened immediately. Why? Because you were the only one who didn't have to stay. God, that landed deep. Because maybe that was the hidden fear beneath everything. Ryan and Melissa belonged automatically through biology, expectation, history. But me. Technically, I had another origin. Another possible family. Dad may have spent 42 years terrified truth would eventually pull me away from him. And maybe sometimes fear disguises itself as distance. Not because love is absent. Because it matters too much. After lunch, Ryan hugged me awkwardly in the parking lot. First real hug in nearly a year. Not magical reconciliation. Just two damaged adults trying not to lose each other completely. Healing usually looks smaller than movies teach us. Around October, Tyler invited me to Lexington for his daughter Harper's 7th birthday party. I almost declined from nerves, then remembered how many years of connection had already been stolen by secrecy. So I went. Harper answered the door wearing a glitter-covered unicorn shirt and immediately announced, "You're the new aunt." I burst out laughing. Kids really do adapt faster than adults. The party was loud and chaotic and wonderfully ordinary. At one point, Tyler's ex-wife Sarah studied my face across the kitchen and shook her head slowly. It's honestly eerie. Apparently, I'm genetically repetitive. She laughed. But later, while helping clean wrapping paper from the living room floor, Tyler asked quietly, "Do you feel different around us?" I understood what he really meant. "Do you feel like you belong here?" I considered carefully before answering. Yes and no. That makes sense. I recognize things, mannerisms, expressions, but emotionally, I shrugged helplessly. You're still strangers I somehow love already. Tyler nodded thoughtfully. I think family can grow in reverse too. That sentence stayed with me afterward. Family can grow in reverse. Not beginning with childhood and history. Beginning with truth. Then building slowly from there. A month later, Mom finally did something I never thought she would. She apologized without defending herself. Fully. No explanations. No, we were trying our best. Just honesty. We were sitting on her condo balcony, wrapped in blankets against the cold, when she suddenly said, "You deserve the truth." I looked over carefully. She continued staring out at the parking lot below. "And I stole years from you because I was afraid." Tears filled my eyes instantly. Not because apology erased damage. Because accountability matters. Real accountability. Not emotional negotiation disguised as remorse. "I'm sorry, Emily." Simple words. But after a lifetime of emotional fog, simplicity felt enormous. I cried quietly while she held my hand. And for the first time since July 2024, I felt something inside me unclench slightly around my mother. Not complete forgiveness, but movement. That winter, my engineering firm officially completed restoration on the pedestrian bridges downtown. Opening day happened December 14th. Cold, bright morning, reporters, city officials, too much coffee. As people walked across the restored structures for the first time, I stood near the river watching sunlight hit steel supports we'd reinforced over months of work. Lewis bumped my shoulder lightly. "You okay?" I nodded. "Yes." And surprisingly, I meant it. Not perfectly okay, but structurally sound again. There's a concept in engineering called fatigue life. Materials weaken under repeated stress cycles over time. Tiny pressures accumulate invisibly until cracks finally appear. Humans work that way too. But there's another truth people forget. Structures can also be retrofitted. Strengthened after damage. Not returned to original condition. Made differently resilient. That's what the past year had done to me. Not restored innocence. Built honesty. Around Christmas, I finally visited Daniel Monroe's grave for the first time. Small cemetery outside Cincinnati, thin layer of snow across the ground. Tyler came with me but stayed back respectfully while I approached alone. I stood there staring at the name etched into stone. Daniel James Monroe. 1958–1998. 40 years old. Younger than I am now. That realization hit hard. My biological father died before reaching the age I currently lived every day. I crouched down slowly and brushed snow from the headstone. And reader, I need you to understand something. I did not suddenly feel complete. No magical spiritual connection appeared. No cinematic closure. Just grief. Quiet, strange grief for a man who never knew I existed and probably would have loved me if given the chance. I whispered softly, "I'm sorry we never met." Then I cried. Not loudly. Just enough. On the drive home, Tyler asked if visiting helped. I thought about it for several miles, then answered honestly. It made him real. That mattered. Because secrets create ghosts. Truth creates humans. Flawed, complicated, mortal humans. By January 2026, almost 18 months had passed since the barbecue. 18 months since Ryan's stupid joke split my life open. Sometimes I still replay that exact moment in my head. The smoke from the grill. The beer bottle in his hand. My mother dropping her fork. The instant before truth detonated. But strangely, the memory hurts differently now. Less like destruction. More like demolition before reconstruction. Because despite all the pain, I finally live inside reality now. Not emotional architecture built on concealment. Real foundations. And real foundations matter. Last week, Ava had another science project. This time she wanted to build the strongest bridge possible using only paper and tape. We spent all afternoon testing designs at my dining room table. Every time one collapsed, she groaned dramatically. "Why does it keep breaking?" I smiled. Because strength isn't about pretending weight doesn't exist. She blinked. "What?" I adjusted one of the folded supports carefully. Strong structures know where pressure goes. She considered that seriously in the way only children do. Then she asked, "What happens if too much pressure builds up?" I looked down at the paper bridge between us. And honestly, I thought about my parents. My father's fear. My mother's shame. My own confusion. All those years of invisible emotional weight traveling silently through our family. Finally I answered. Then eventually something cracks. Ava looked worried. "But can you fix it?" I smiled softly. "Sometimes. And maybe that's the truest thing I've learned through all this. Not every family survives truth. Not every relationship deserves repair. But some do. If the people inside them are finally willing to stop confusing silence with love. These days my life feels quieter. Cleaner somehow. Not because everything healed perfectly. Because nothing hidden is still rotting underneath the floorboards. I know who my fathers were. I know who failed me. I know who tried. And most importantly, I know none of it was ever my fault. That knowledge changes the entire shape of a life. By March of 2026, I had finally stopped carrying the DNA results in my purse. That probably sounds insignificant. But for almost 2 years, those folded papers traveled everywhere with me like emotional emergency supplies. Proof, explanation, evidence that my instincts hadn't betrayed me all those years. Then one Tuesday morning, while cleaning out my bag before a client meeting in Cleveland, I found the envelope crumpled between receipts and lip balm. And suddenly I realized something important. I didn't need proof anymore. Not because the truth stopped mattering. Because it had finally settled into my bones, instead of living like an active wound. I stood there in my kitchen holding those papers while sunrise light spilled across the counter, and for the first time since July 2024 I felt still. Not happy exactly. Not healed in some perfect cinematic way. Just stable. Like a bridge after reinforcement, finally holding weight without groaning. I put the DNA results in my filing cabinet beside Dad's letter and closed the drawer. Then I went to work. That spring became unexpectedly beautiful in quiet ways. Not dramatic transformation. No revenge fantasy. just life slowly becoming livable again. My engineering firm expanded enough to hire 2 junior engineers and a full-time administrative coordinator. Melissa started texting me stupid memes at random hours again, like she used to before everything exploded. Mom learned how to use video calls properly and accidentally kept putting filters on herself during conversations. Once she spent 20 minutes talking to me with animated cat ears over her head without realizing it. I laughed so hard I cried. And for the first time in a long time, those tears weren't connected to grief. Ryan and I remained complicated. Maybe we always will be. But complicated is better than broken. One Saturday in April, he called asking if I could help inspect water damage in his basement because you understand structure stuff. Classic Ryan. No emotional vulnerability. Just disguised outreach through practical problems. I almost said no out of pride. Then I remembered how many years Dad and I communicated through practical things too. So I went. The basement smelled like mildew and frustration. Ryan stood near the furnace looking exhausted, while Jenna sorted soaked cardboard boxes nearby. I crouched beside a cracked section of foundation wall. How long has this leak been happening? A few months. Why didn't you call someone sooner? He shrugged. Thought it'd stop. I looked up at him. And Rita, I swear to God the symbolism nearly knocked me unconscious. Thought it'd stop. That was my entire family history in one sentence. Ignore the crack. Hope pressure disappears. Act surprised when the damage spreads. I actually laughed out loud. Ryan frowned. What? Nothing. But later, while we hauled ruined storage bins outside, he suddenly said, I was angry because I thought Dad chose you over us. I set down the box slowly. Ryan, no, let me finish. That alone shocked me. My brother almost never willingly entered emotional territory. He wiped sweat from his forehead. After the will, after the letter, I kept thinking maybe Dad loved me less than I thought. I looked at him carefully, then answered honestly, I don't think love works that way. He stared at the driveway for a long moment. I know that now. Progress. Small. Human. Real. Then he quietly added, I think he was trying to make up for something. My throat tightened instantly. Yeah, I admitted, I think so too. Ryan nodded. And for the first time since the barbecue, neither of us sounded defensive. Just sad. That mattered. A few weeks later, Tyler and Harper came to Columbus for a weekend visit. Watching Harper and Ava play together in Melissa's backyard felt surreal in the gentlest possible way. 2 little girls connected by secrets neither of them cared about. At one point Ava asked Harper, So you're Aunt Emily's niece too? Harper nodded confidently. Yep, that's cool. And then they immediately resumed arguing about sidewalk chalk colors. Children accept expanded love naturally before adults contaminate it with hierarchy. That afternoon, Tyler and I sat on Melissa's patio while the girls chased fireflies across the yard. You know, he said, sipping beer, Dad would have loved this. Normally comments like that still hurt. This time they warmed something instead. Not because they erased loss. Because they allowed possibility. I looked across the yard toward the old maple tree, where Ryan's terrible joke detonated my entire life nearly 2 years earlier. Same yard. Different reality. Funny how places absorb ghosts. Tyler followed my gaze. You okay? I smiled softly. Yes. And again I meant it. Not because the past stopped hurting. Because pain no longer controlled the entire structure. In June, Mom finally gave me the last unopened box from the old family house. I couldn't go through it, she admitted quietly. Inside were dozens of old photographs, school papers, birthday cards, and random fragments of childhood. At the bottom sat a small cassette tape labelled in Dad's handwriting. Emily, age 5. I nearly stopped breathing. After digging through storage for an ancient cassette player, I finally got it working that night. Static crackled first. Then Dad's voice filled my living room. "You ready, Emmy?" 5-year-old me shouted. "Yes." I started crying instantly. The tape was mostly nonsense. Dad helping me practice reading, me singing badly, him laughing quietly in the background. Then near the end came something that absolutely destroyed me. Little kid me asked, "Daddy, are you always gonna be my dad?" Long pause. Then his voice. Steady, certain. "Always." I broke completely. Full body sobbing alone on my couch at midnight. Because there it was. No fear. No hesitation. No biology. Just love. Simple enough for a child to understand before adults complicated everything. I listened to that tape 4 times in a row. And somewhere around 1:30 in the morning, something inside me finally settled permanently into place. Richard Carter was my father. Not by accident. By choice repeated over 42 years. That counts. It counts enormously. In August 2026, almost exactly 2 years after the barbecue, Melissa hosted another family gathering. Smaller than before. Quieter. Healthier. No giant performances pretending we were perfect. Just people trying honestly. Ryan grilled burgers, while Harper and Ava chased each other through sprinklers. Mom sat under the maple tree reading with oversized sunglasses perched on her head. At one point, Ryan walked over holding 2 paper plates. He handed me one awkwardly. "Burger." I accepted it. "Thanks." We stood side by side silently, for a moment listening to cicadas scream through the humid evening air. Then Ryan said quietly, "I'm glad you're my sister." Simple sentence. Late. Imperfect. But real. I looked at him carefully. "You too." And for the first time in years, the words didn't feel strained. Nearby, Mom laughed suddenly at something Melissa said, and the sound startled me because I realized how long it had been since laughter sounded natural in our family. Not forced. Not careful. Just alive. As sunset spread across the yard, I wandered toward the old patio alone. Same cracked concrete. Same grill. Same place where my entire identity once shattered. Only now it looked smaller somehow. Less haunted. I sat in one of the lawn chairs and watched the girls wave sparklers through the darkening air. Harper ran over first. "Aunt Emily, look." She spun wildly with her sparkler. Then Ava joined her. "Mine's brighter." "No, mine is." Their laughter echoed across the yard. And suddenly, I remembered something Dad told me when I was little after we watched fireworks downtown one 4th of July. I must have been 7 or 8. I got scared by how loud they were and covered my ears. Dad crouched beside me and said, "Beautiful things are sometimes noisy too." At the time I thought he meant fireworks. Now I think maybe he meant families. Messy. Loud. Dangerous when handled carelessly. Still capable of beauty. Even after damage. Especially after truth. That night before leaving, Mom hugged me near the front door. Not tentative anymore. Not guilt-ridden. Just warm. "I love you," she whispered. And for once, I didn't hear hidden fear underneath it. I hugged her back. I know. Driving home, windows down against the summer heat, I realized revenge had never actually been the thing I wanted. Not really. I didn't want my family destroyed. I wanted honesty. I wanted acknowledgement. I wanted someone to finally say, "You weren't imagining it. You weren't too sensitive. You deserve the truth." And eventually they did. Not perfectly, not all at once, but enough. These days my life is wonderfully ordinary. I supervise bridge restorations, I overwater my balcony plants, I forget to answer texts for days at a time, I visit Tyler and Harper every few months, I have Sunday coffee with Mom twice a month now. Sometimes we talk about Dad. Sometimes we don't. Grief no longer fills every room between us. Last week, while reviewing blueprints late at the office, one of my junior engineers asked why I cared so much about foundation integrity compared to cosmetic design elements. I answered without really thinking, because hidden weaknesses eventually become visible failures. Then I stopped, because maybe that sentence explained my entire life. Families are structures too. You can paint over cracks for years. You can decorate around them beautifully. You can pretend uneven weight distribution isn't dangerous. But eventually pressure reveals everything hidden underneath. And strangely, that revelation saved me. Because once the collapse happened, I finally stopped wasting energy trying to earn belonging from people who already loved me, but didn't know how to show it honestly. I stopped apologizing for sensing what was real. I stopped confusing confusion with personal failure. Most importantly, I stopped believing blood alone defines family. Love does. Choice does. Presence does. Truth does. A few nights ago, there was a thunderstorm over Columbus. Huge one. The kind Dad used to love. I sat on my balcony wrapped in a blanket, listening to rain hammer rooftops while lightning flashed across the sky. Beside me sat three things. Dad's compass, Daniel Monroe's photograph, that old cassette tape. For a long time I just listened to the storm. Then eventually I realized something that would have terrified the version of me from 2 years ago. I no longer felt divided between two fathers. I felt formed by both. One gave me my face. One gave me my life. And somehow, after all the betrayal, grief, resentment, guilt, and rebuilding, that truth no longer felt like a fracture. It felt like a bridge. So if you're reading this while questioning your place inside your own family, if you've spent years feeling slightly outside, something everybody else insisted was normal, if your instincts keep whispering that hidden pressure exists beneath the surface, please trust yourself. Children notice more than adults admit. And truth may destroy the version of your life built on silence. But sometimes destruction is the first honest step toward building something strong enough to finally carry your real weight. You are not required to stay inside structures that deny reality. You are allowed to ask questions. You are allowed to grieve what should have been. You are allowed to choose yourself. And if the people who love you truly love you, eventually they'll stop asking you to carry the family secret alone. They'll help carry the truth instead. That's what healing finally became for me. Not forgetting, not revenge, just no longer carrying invisible weight by myself. And honestly, after 42 years of feeling slightly misplaced in my own life, that quiet relief feels more valuable than anything blood could ever prove.